Hello and welcome to Wednesday's Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily on this, the most important day for this government since July the 4th when it entered power.
It is Wednesday, October the 30th. It is the night before Halloween. It is Budget Day, and at 12:30 this afternoon, straight after Prime Minister's questions, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will be standing up to announce the biggest statement of this sort we've seen in a very long time. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as you heard, to preview everything that's coming up today in less than 20 minutes is Sam Coates of Sky News. Sam, are you well rested? Are you excited? Are you looking forward to the day?
Can't wait, although I do feel, because of a deliberate decision by the Treasury, we do know almost everything. There are no rabbits, we were told on Sunday. Let's see whether that turns out to be true, because then in that case, you'll hear it all here. Just very quickly, if you're with us because it's Budget Day and don't normally have us as part of your morning habit, then follow us on your podcast app. We can always be with you for about 7:30 in the morning with the biggest stories of the political day ahead. Okay, on to the budget. This is possibly the definitive moment of this government. And to give you a sense of how high the stakes are, as Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer said continually through the election, growth is their first priority and would be their first priority if they got into power. But yesterday I was talking to, a pretty key figure who would be and is involved in helping the government deliver growth, which is the head of the CBI, Ray Newton-Smith. And I asked her how business was feeling about the budget that it was about to hear. And listen to what she said.
I think there is a lot of fear and trepidation in terms of what we might ultimately see in the budget. Some of the business leaders that I've been speaking to have said, look, this is a tax on growth. It is a tax on hiring. They will be looking for other measures in the budget to see where that promise of the measures to really deliver headroom so to make it easy for businesses to invest.
So there we have it. Of course, employers are not the only audience of this budget, but they were the audience that thought that they were going to get perhaps an easier time from this Labour government than it's turned out to be. So they, along with everybody else, are listening intently to find out what Rachel Reeves says when she stands up at 12:30.
I think what it comes down to, Sam, is that Rachel Reeves has ultimately made a decision. She knows, or she feels, or she's saying that she has to raise taxes massively, perhaps the biggest set of tax rises we've ever seen in cash terms in any budget. And that money has to come from somewhere, and they are making a political choice not to raise taxes on what they call working people. Now, we've had endless chat about what working people means, but broadly it is true that Labour are not planning to increase income tax. They're not planning to increase the sort of paycheck taxes, if you like, that people instantly feel in their pockets. And therefore, it raises the obvious question, where are you going to raise all this money from? The simple answer that they've decided upon is business and wealthier people through things like we expect capital gains tax rises. That is a simple political choice. It's a very Labour political choice. In a way, if you take 3 steps back from all the noise, it's not that surprising that when a Labour government comes in, it raises taxes on business and the wealthy, and it sticks a load of money into sort of socialist left-wing healthcare. It's kind of, well, that's what Labour governments do, and that is what the Labour government is going to do today, we think. I think it would be really useful for our listeners, Sam, given the amount of stuff about this budget that's either leaked out or frankly just been briefed out by the Treasury, or indeed by Rachel Reeves in big speeches in Washington, if you want to try and run our listeners through what we're actually going to get today. Now, you could probably spend the next 15 minutes doing that, but I reckon you need to try and do it in about 2 minutes so that we can actually talk to it. So let's give Sam Coates the 2-minute budget challenge to run us through as much as you can about what we know, or we think we know, Rachel Reeves is going to announce this afternoon.
Okay, ready, steady, go. The Chancellor thinks that she has to find about £40 billion to fund public services and growth. 35-ish billion pounds will come from tax. The rest will come from a little bit of welfare and some spending reprioritisation. So what are those tax rises? Well, the biggest will be raising the amount of national insurance that employers have to pay. That could raise up to £20 billion. Secondly, they're going to continue the freeze on income tax thresholds all the way to 2030. So that's an extra 2 years. They will raise capital gains by a bit, but not as much as they were thinking. Inheritance tax will rise a bit, and some loopholes will be closed. Private equity will see a raise in the tax on carried interest, but again, not as much as they perhaps wanted in the Labour manifesto. There will be changes to the windfall tax on oil, partly because of a drop in the oil prices. So that's the tax set in this budget. What are the main measures that they're going to do? Well, one of the things they're going to do, we've had a lot about this, is changing the fiscal rules by changing the definition of debt, which will allow Rachel Reeves to borrow possibly 50 billion more in order to put that into capital projects, into big shiny investment projects. And they're also going to raise the minimum wage. They announced that last night, up by 6.7%. All of this is because they want to spend more. 10 billion more for the NHS, 1.4 billion more for school buildings, and they'll also today announce how they're going to pay for 6,500 new teachers, 3 billion more for the armed forces, but the defence budget will remain at 2.3% of GDP, so they won't quite hit that 2.5%. Whether or not they'll give a target for when that'll happen, we'll see. We've also heard some announcements about housing in the low billions, but not a huge amount comparative historically. We will also see a raise in the amount of money that Whitehall departments get. Jeremy Hunt was suggesting they'd get 1% above inflation. That will be raised to 2% for most government departments. But because government departments have to pay for big public sector pay rises, and because of black holes, there's going to be pain in justice, the Home Office, Transport, Environment, and the aid budget, as well as the council budget, which is resulting in things like the bus price cap raising from £2 to £3. They will say they are funding things like those big scandals, contaminated blood and Horizon, the compensation schemes. And that is the shape of the budget in 2.5 minutes.
That is not bad. 2.5 minutes. I was going to buzz you out after the 2 minutes, but actually you were doing so well, I just let it run. Let's talk about a few things that people actually need to watch out for, stuff we don't know or stuff that could change the whole dynamic today. First of all, Sam, number one, the detail of some of these tax rises we don't know. We don't know exactly how much the employer end of NICs is going to go up. We don't know exactly how much capital gains tax is going to go up. We don't know the detail of inheritance tax. Fuel duty is another one where there is a sort of cloud of uncertainty about what the government is going to do. They will take a hammering from certain newspapers and certain sectors. We know if fuel duty does go up, but it is a big, expensive tax rising measure if they want to press ahead with at least part of it. I will be keeping my eye on that. Number two, keep an eye on the investment, the money that Rachel Reeves is going to raise through borrowing after changing the rules. How much of that is she going to spend today? We are told she's freeing up something like £50 billion worth of investment capacity. That doesn't mean she's going to spend 50 billion quid on projects today, but she will certainly spend some of it. How much of that is going to be spent? Which projects precisely are going to be the lucky few? Will they be in Labour constituencies? Will they be in marginal seats? Will they be big infrastructure projects for the future? We think probably the latter, but keep an eye on that. And three, market reaction, Sam. Keep a close eye on the markets. How does the city and the big international finance industry react to this? There is a lingering fear at the back of Treasury minds, as there probably will be in every big budget since 2022, of something going horribly wrong, of a sort of slow or rather rapid over a few days crash for Britain. And as we know, that is absolute death for any chancellor and probably any prime minister as well these days after what happened to Liz Truss. The Treasury are supremely confident, or reasonably confident, that they've rolled the pitch enough on this with Rachel Reeves' speech last week and all the briefings to the press, that everybody knows what's coming. But nevertheless, there is that lingering possibility in the background. So market reaction will be massively important to that as well. And the other one, Sam, I mean, you say no rabbit, and that is definitely what the Treasury are briefing. And for those wondering what on earth we're talking about, what that really means is a rabbit in the hat, something that the Chancellor pulls out on budget day to grab the headlines. It's always possible there's something relatively small but still interesting that we don't know about that she decides to do that does grab the headlines today and leads bulletins tomorrow. maybe some spending policy which goes wrong, or some spending policy which captures newspapers' imaginations and can sort of seize the narrative on a day when, as you say, we sort of feel like we know the shape of this already. You will see journalists scrabbling around and looking for new lines, and it can sometimes be something quite small, like increasing the VAT rate on hot baked goods, as George Osborne tried to do in 2012, which can sometimes take hold of the narrative on these big budget days and really take the Treasury by surprise. So all I'm saying is it's just possible, Sam, and even though they don't think there's a rabbit in the budget, we might find one.
As we've been talking about for some days, I've been struck by the pessimism in parts of government about this budget, because basically Rachel Reeves is riding two horses. On the one hand, she's saying that she's got a lot of money to spend because she's borrowed more and taxed more. And on the other, there are going to be some bits of government where there are going to be pretty tight spending decisions, even squeezes, even things being stopped that currently happen. Now, we may find out which bits of justice, the Home Office, Transport, Environment and the aid budget come under the knife today. But it might be that actually that takes a little bit longer, and it's only when we engage in conversations with the departments themselves that this happens. I was told by one political advisor, one Labour advisor who worked on the election campaign, this will be a difficult budget to sell. It will look better this week than it will do when people start to unravel it, because then, and I'm quoting this Labour advisor, people will begin to see through it. And it's that sense that, and I get this from elsewhere as well, one person's got to implement some of the decisions in this budget, kind of went through the numbers, worked out what they actually mean, and then said, the government seemed, ministers seemed shocked when we explained to them the consequences of what they've decided. When doing some of the budget, the civil servants did not explain some of the consequences. They added, it's going to be a long few weeks. So I would suggest that the learning journey of what they've decided begins today, but doesn't end today. And the reporting job for people like you and me does not end today, because the budget will be presented in a particular way by Rachel Reeves, but the numbers imply quite a lot of pain and difficult stuff in some areas, and they will not front that up immediately. And it's kind of our job over the coming weeks and months to find out what that is. You're right, the markets are absolutely critical. The number that people will be looking at is the cost of borrowing, so the amount that it costs to buy, for instance, 10-year government gilts, UK debt. That has been going up, but as Ed Conway, Sky's data and economics editor, was making very clear last night, at the moment, that rise is tracking the American rise in government debt costs. And as a consequence, he does not think that there's any particular sign of nervousness in the markets to date. However, if this budget does not land very well, what will happen is the Labour Party will put pressure on Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer to spend more. The whole of the rest of this parliament is going to be a story of the Labour Party wanting to spend more money than they spend today. And the question is, can Rachel Reeves, over the medium term, in the next few months, withstand that pressure? She has made very clear she is a tough chancellor. That is the vibe that she has very, very successfully cultivated. But once we get through this event and get into the difficult decisions bit of this parliament, can she hold the line?
I think a good example of what you're talking about, Sam, is the row that we had earlier in the week, and actually had been going on in government for the past couple of weeks, about the cap on bus fares, where the Treasury had decided this was a temporary cap brought in by the Conservative Party, in the sense that it was only funded through to the end of this year, and it was expensive, and it didn't deliver big financial rewards for the Treasury in the way that they analyse these things, and therefore in a budget like this, when we're looking to cut costs everywhere, it had to go. And it was then explained to people in Downing Street by senior people in the Department of Transport that if they just get rid of this cap, then bus fares in certain areas would go up massively, not just by a little bit. I mean, you were talking about bus fares going up to like £14 or something in some very rural areas where you have to have a subsidy to avoid the cost going absolutely through the roof. There is then a rearguard action fought by in this case, Louise Hay, the Transport Secretary, very much on the left of the cabinet. And indeed, Downing Street gives way to a degree. And by Downing Street, I mean 10 and 11 giving way to a degree and finding some money to at least extend the cap in part for another year, capping it at £3, which they decided would be just about palatable for people. And then we'll revisit again next year. And that is a classic example of the sort of thing that you're talking about, where a cut is made and it hits a departmental budget, or in this case, was going to be made. And then there is intense pressure, pushback. And in the end, they find some more money to spend. And we will see that all over the place, as you say, over the next year, indeed over this Parliament, as some of the implications of the departmental spending squeezes that we won't see the detail of today start to become clear. And you can imagine little campaigns popping up all over the Labour Party to save this and save that and stop this in this area and stop that in that area. All of that is likely to play out over the year ahead.
So to that end, the question is, what is the amount of money that Rachel Reeves could spend but hasn't? Right? Now, you referenced something earlier. She has changed the debt rules to give herself about £50 billion of additional borrowing before she hits her self-imposed limits, known as the fiscal rules, for capital, for investment. Okay, so she's going to spend half of that. In other words, she will have a remaining pot for capital projects, investment projects, hospitals, schools, and all of that, of about 25 billion. We sort of know that. But there's another figure, Jack, and this is really important. It's one that we haven't talked about. The main limit that Rachel Reeves is going to impose on herself when it comes to borrowing isn't the promise to get the government's budget in balance, get rid of the to make sure that we're raising more tax than we spend as a government in 5 years' time. The main limit that she's setting is that day-to-day spending, the kind of spending that goes on salaries and day-to-day work by government departments, must be what's known as imbalance, must be all coming from taxation and not from borrowing. And that will be a tough rule to meet. And she will leave herself something of a margin of error on that. I am told of about £20 billion. And that is the pot, so £20 billion extra that she could spend on day-to-day government operations that she's choosing not to give the markets a bit of confidence that she's left herself some wiggle room. That is the pot, I think, that Labour MPs and ministers are going to try and raid all the way through this Parliament. That's money for essential operations in the views of some cabinet ministers that at the moment they just haven't been allowed to dip into. And so I think loads and loads of ministers and bits of government are going to have their eye on that number. So the thing I'm going to look out for, the number in the budget, is how much headroom she has against that first fiscal rule. I know it's horrible jargon, but think of it like the pot for day-to-day operations to be massively squeezed by Rachel Reeves this year and next year, that everyone's going to want to dip their hand into. How much is it? And does she start actually helping herself to some of the extra kind of wiggle room that she's left herself?
One more thing to look out for today. The Office for Budget Responsibility publishes its forecasts and assessment of the budget alongside the budget, as they do every year. Within that report, we're expecting an analysis of what Rachel Reeves claims to be a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, going through that and explaining what she's talking about and where it comes from. It is said to be pretty positive for the government, and you can expect Rachel Reeves to be shouting from the rooftops that the independent OBR has verified what she's been saying about a big black hole in the public finances that she needs to fix. And that will be a big political moment. The Shadow Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who of course was in charge of the Treasury when all this was happening, is very, very angry about it. The OBR will be giving their own press conference this afternoon at 2:30, about an hour after the Chancellor sits down, having finished her speech. And you can expect that to be a very contentious moment as well. The OBR forecasts, of course, also really important because they will include their growth forecasts for the UK for the period ahead. This is a government that has put everything into growth. A government that says its entire economic plan is predicated on the economy going again at a much faster rate. Will we see any sign of that today? And what does that mean for future spending possibilities for this government? We'll find all that out in the OBR report today. So while don't be too distracted by what the Chancellor's saying in the Commons and this little announcement here and this little announcement there, far more important in some aspects is what's buried in that OBR report, which will be published at 1:30.
Here's one reason why the budget might end up proving like a very sensible set of decisions. That's if over the coming 2 years, actually interest rates start coming down dramatically, as actually is forecast, and the economy grows much faster than current projections, even than the projections that we get today. And here's one reason why it might go wrong: because of global turbulence. If Trump is elected next week, slaps tariffs on global trade, there's a rise in the oil price because of more turbulence in the Middle East, and the economies around the world go south, then actually I think it'll look very, very tricky for this government if they too don't get growth. Who knows what the outcome is? We're out of time. It's all now over to Rachel Reeves.
Have a wonderful budget day. Enjoy it all. We will be back with you all tomorrow morning at 7:30 to pick over the bones of how it went and talk about the day ahead. Thank you very much for joining us on Budget Day.